This is CNN.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Paula Zahn in New York City this morning. And Miles O'Brien will be joining us from Atlanta a little bit later on. It is almost 22 hours after the unspeakable terrorist incident that has forever changed New York City. You're looking at pictures of some of the rubble, what is left of the 107 Twin Towers of the World Trade Center. New Yorkers just beginning to grasp the enormous devastation wrought in their city. Some 1,450 victims are now admitted to area hospitals. The mayor says that a horrendous number of lives have been lost here. Some city officials saying those numbers will go into the thousands. About the only encouraging news this morning are reports that some of the victims trapped in the rubble have established cell phone contact with their family members. And late last night, two New York City police were rescued from a surrounding area around this perimeter area this morning. We are also going to show you a picture of Washington right now, where we are told the Pentagon fire is now under control. Experts there estimating the death toll could go as high as 800. I wanted to share with you now some of the headlines Americans are waking up to this morning. The Daily News proclaiming it is war. The New York Post saying an act of war, World Trade Center destroyed, many dead. The New York Times, U.S. attacked, hijacked jets, destroy Twin Towers, and hit Pentagon in day of terror. Joining right now is the governor of New York, Governor Pataki. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Paul.
What can you tell us about the ongoing rescue efforts?
Well, the search and rescue operation is paramount. We have 18 teams down there right now trying to find people who might still be alive in the rubble. We have additional teams coming in from as far away as Puerto Rico, and everything that can be done to try to save as many lives as possible is still undergoing.
How much hope is there that you actually will find people alive in
Well,
this
there
rubble?
were people found alive late last night. Two Port Authority police officers were found alive and rescued. And as you said, there are cell phone communications, so there is hope. And the devastation is enormous downtown, but there's always hope. And the teams are out there risking their lives, doing the job, trying to save other lives.
You mentioned this team that came into Puerto Rico. I understand 8 special teams that all have been flown into this area. Walk us through the challenge, though, of these rescue workers getting in there. Last night you had a great fear that there was still enough left of the bottom part of the tower that people could be hurt going in there and trying to do their jobs.
Well, Paul, it wasn't just the remaining part of the tower itself, but I was down there in a building. One of the high-rises right next door was still burning, and you look down, you can see it's still burning, and there was a risk that that building could collapse. And yet, in that risk, we had firefighters, we had EMTs, we had police out there going through the rubble, risking their lives in the hopes that they could save some others. And it's just incredible and inspiring, really, to see the courage among those professionals who are down there trying to save lives. And you never give up hope, and we're going to continue to try to save as many lives as possible.
I think the news that has pierced New York is the hardest is the fact that some 250 firefighters have lost their lives. They were among the initial 400 that went into this area. Can you share any more information with us about
Paul,
that this morning?
there are more than 200 firefighters unaccounted for. There are many who have been found dead, and it's just a tragedy because these are true heroes and brave New Yorkers who risked their lives and gave their lives to save others. And when I was down there early this morning, you could see in the eyes of the firefighters who were down there in the rescue operation, you could see the pain, but you could also sense the courage and sense the professionalism as they went about the effort of digging through the rubble trying to save their colleagues. And this is an unspeakable tragedy, and it is an act of war. But even among the death and the destruction, you see the hope of people trying to save other lives, and people trying to do their jobs professionally as Americans always do.
If you could, bring our audience up to date on what is happening in the city. We should make it clear the markets are closed,
Right.
all flights are suspended until at least noon today.
Right.
everything south of 14th Street, all the businesses are closed.
Right.
What else should we know?
The city south of 14th Street is closed. We lost a power substation when one of the buildings collapsed last night, and we're in the process now of moving in emergency generators to try to provide help there. The schools are closed across the city. State offices are closed throughout Manhattan. The bridges and tunnels are still closed, and I spoke just a few minutes ago with the federal officials, and they're looking to see when we can reopen them, but obviously security concerns have to be paramount. So we're hopeful that as the day goes on, the city will return more to normal, but we have to be cognizant of the security concerns, and we're letting the federal officials take the lead on that.
We touched on the fact that over 250 firefighters have been killed, 85 police officers missing. We know that some 50,000 people worked in that World Trade Center area. Any insights as to what we might be facing?
Paula, we just don't know. We don't know how many were able to get out before the buildings collapsed. We don't know how many were in there in the first place. And we just are doing our best to try to account for everyone who may have been there and to continue with the search and rescue in the hope that we can free and save some other lives as well.
Governor Pataki, good of you to join us. It's such a traumatic time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're going to go to Miles O'Brien now. Miles, before I leave you, I just wanted to give New Yorkers a great deal of credit for living up to the plea that city officials and the governor has made for donations of blood. And at some area hospitals, people yesterday were lined up for hours wanting to donate blood to the thousands of victims here. We'll be back a little bit later on. Miles, you with me?
In all, there were 4 aircraft that were involved in this carefully coordinated, diabolically planned plot. 2 of them, of course, as you well know, crashed into the World Trade Center. Another one crashed at the doorstep to the Pentagon, and that's where CNN's Bob Franken is this morning. And Bob, while the effort in New York is to find perhaps some survivors trapped beneath the wreckage at the Pentagon, there's not much hope of that, is there?
No, as a matter of fact, the Defense Secretary said that there is very little hope of any survivors. What they also don't know is exactly how many casualties. That is to say, how many people were killed when the plane, the American Airlines plane, crashed into the Pentagon. It was United Airlines plane, crashed into the Pentagon yesterday about a little less than 22 hours ago and caused such devastation. You can see that in back of me. Also in back of me, you can see the medevac helicopters that are awaiting for the search teams to go into the rubble. That's not clear exactly when they're going to go in. There had been fires overnight inside the building, and of course they want to make sure that it's safe to go in before they begin the very grim job of searching for the people who in fact will be the bad news that comes out of this very tragic event. But at the same time, the damage has been done at the Pentagon. The work goes on. As a matter of fact, military officials ordered overnight the Pacific Fleet to send out ships that would go out into the coastline of the West Coast and offer a protective barrier of the West Coast of the United States and Hawaii. And that followed action on the East Coast, where ships were sent out of Norfolk, including aircraft carriers. And those ships, in fact, were up there to protect particularly the ports of entry of New York and Washington. So that is the scene there. Back here at the Pentagon, the building will open for business. The Defense Secretary, the President, all are determined to show that, in fact, this terrorism is not going to stop the United States government from conducting its business, and of course here, its military business, but only about half of it will be open. The engineers have decided that there's too much damage, too much danger of structural damage, so only about half the employees are going to show up for work. The others will have to find out whether or not they come in. Now, you've got to understand this is a massive building with over 17 miles of corridor. About half of that will stay shut down, and of course part of it will be shut down because the search is going to go on to find out just how severe the damage was in tragic human terms. Miles?
Bob, before you get away, you mentioned the aircraft carriers and the support in and around the east coast of the United States. As I understand it, the Enterprise, another aircraft carrier, will remain in the Persian Gulf. Do you have any sense from where you sit as to what, if anything, will be bolstered in the Middle East as it relates to the U.S. military?
Well, of course, they're trying to decide that, and the first thing they have to decide is what a retaliation plan will be. Even before they decide that, they're going to have to decide who would be the target of such a plan. As far as the Enterprise is concerned, it had been rotated out of the Persian Gulf. In fact, was in the the Arabian Sea, or the Arabian Sea, and it was told to stop steaming back to the United States, to stay put. So there are now two aircraft carriers in that region waiting to find out whether they'll be needed in some sort of military action.
CNN's Bob Franken at the Pentagon this morning. Let's go back to New York and Paula Zahn. Paula.
Miles, thank you so much. As you join us right now, I am struck by the image you see behind me. We're going to try to get a tight close-up of this. What is left of the World Trade Center still smoldering this morning. The cloud shrouding the Statue of Liberty, one of the most powerful symbols of this great city. Right now we're going to check in with Gary Tuckman, who joins us on the phone to give us an update on what some of the area hospitals are facing right now and trying to treat the untold numbers of New Yorkers injured yesterday. Gary?
Well, Paula, first things first, I'm about as close as you can get to where the World Trade Center used to be that you're allowed to be at right now, about 2 blocks away from where the World Trade Centers used to stand. And here's some important information we just found out. I just talked with a medic who had been on the scene for 17 hours. He was just leaving. He was thoroughly exhausted. He tells us as we speak, they are in the middle of a rescue of 2 people who are alive under the rubble. 2 men. He tells us one of the men is 50 years old. The other man, he doesn't know his age, but right now, emergency officials are in the middle of a rescue of 2 people who are alive under the rubble. And Paula, you were just pointing out the white cloud. We look at the sky. It is a beautiful blue sky. The sun just rose in New York City a short time ago. There's not a cloud in the sky except for the huge, sickening cloud that still hangs over where the World Trade Centers used to be. This part of Manhattan right now, it is just so hard to look at. There are no members of the public here. It's completely shut off, only to emergency officials and to the members of the media who've been able to get past checkpoints. But what we see are police, fire officials, and then something I never thought I'd see in the streets of New York City, members of the Army National Guard in full riot gear, wearing helmets with sidearms. And it's something you see in other countries sometimes, something I've never seen in the United States of America, with all these members of the military standing there and making sure that no one passes by them that's not supposed to. It's a very hard sight to see, especially for those of us who are so familiar with New York City, a city where pretty much anything goes, where in this part of Manhattan, late at night when we were here last night, you would see all kinds of people walking around having a good time. And right now, it is just a sickening sight for all of us to see what we're seeing here in New York City. We never thought we would see it before. And literally, it's sickening when you see it. It's also sickening when you smell it. We've all been advised to wear masks here because of the fumes that are emanating from where these World Trade Center buildings exploded 22 and a half hours ago. Paula, back to you.
Gary, there was tremendous concern last night about the safety of rescuers going in there trying to get to these trapped people. How unstable does this area continue to be?
There's still a lot of concern, Paula, but there's obviously an easier situation right now because the fires are basically out. It's still a dangerous situation, but the fact is, sadly, the buildings have collapsed, and that was the main concern for hours after this happened, that the buildings were eventually going to collapse. And that's what happened. So right now they feel they have more freedom to be there, but obviously there's still a lot of problems with just everyone wandering around. So there aren't as many people there as you think there should be at this time. We walked down there. We saw there's certainly a lot of emergency officials, but right now you have to remember that you're in a part of Manhattan that's landlocked. It's not easy to get lots of rescue officials here, and they're saying they have as many as they can deal with right now in that part of Manhattan.
Gary, I know the information is quite murky at this time, but do you believe that these 2 men that rescuers are in the process of trying to get to are the same 2 men who had established cell phone contact with their families?
We asked the medic that same exact question. He said he did not know if they had established cell phone contact. He was just elated to say that there were 2 men that they were trying to get at this point.
And any kind of reaction to what appears to be the reality there from rescue workers of the loss of some 250 New York firefighters and perhaps as many as 85 New York police officers?
Paul, I've got to tell you, I have seen a number of firemen. I saw one firewoman, and I saw a number of policemen crying, sitting on a stoop earlier this morning. People realize they have lost a lot of their friends. A lot of people are just sitting there in disbelief. They just can't believe what happened. But the people who have the tears in their eyes and who have been crying obviously know it's true and know it's a real-life nightmare.
And I think probably one of the greatest challenges right now for city officials is to try to give us a better grasp on what the total devastation was there. And I think you've made it quite clear because of the difficulty getting into the area. We may not know for many days how many people actually lost their lives. Gary, if you would, we'd love for you to stand by and continue to give us updates throughout the morning because you were in fact closer to the rubble than anybody else has ever gotten. Gary, thanks so much. I'm going to leave you now and turn my attention to former General Wesley Clark, who joins us from Little Rock, Arkansas this morning. Good morning, sir. Can you hear me?
Good morning, Paula.
Sir, yesterday you expressed, I think it would be fair to say, some anger that the U.S. was apparently caught off guard by these attacks. Do you stand by that?
Well, we've known for a long time that there were groups that were planning actions against the United States. We believed that we had good intelligence on this. We'd broken up a number of previous efforts, but in the intelligence business, of course, you never know what you don't know. And it's clear that we weren't successful in this case. And I think across the American Armed Forces, over the years, we've sharpened our techniques to protect ourselves. We've been involved in certain actions against terrorist groups. I think there's a sense of not only anger but resolve today to tend our losses and to move ahead in direction with the National Command Authority, with our President, and to do everything we can do to take this campaign back to those who brought it to America.
All right, General, if you would, please stand by. We understand a news conference is getting underway at Bellevue Hospital, one of the many area hospitals where victims have been transported.
Do you have figures on how many people who were trapped in the rubble have been brought here?
I don't have any actual. I don't have any actual figures to give you. We do know that we at Bellevue have gotten over 225 patients, I believe, since this all started yesterday morning. And as I mentioned before, a lot of those were seen, treated, and released to go home. But I don't have what was actually trapped out of that.
Are any of you guys getting any kind of word from the scene? Any kind of people are going to be coming your way? Any kind of hope?
We are in close contact with OEM. Fire department, EMS, and they would contact us through our emergency department and let us know what potentials that would be coming in. So we're fully prepared and we're fully in contact with the city.
Are the numbers that you gave us different than the numbers, or are they inclusive of the numbers that were released earlier from St. Vincent?
Our numbers are exclusive to Bellevue Hospital.
So the numbers you gave us are only people who are here.
Right,
they don't include.
Yes, that is correct. The numbers that I reported to you are what has arrived here at Bellevue.
So we can include the other ones then in our total when we want to do this area.
That's correct.
Second question: what's going on with your morgue? How is it being used?
Well, let me answer that question. Our mortuary is working. Our mortuary is working with the Chief Medical Examiner's office.
Hold on a second.
Our mortuary is in close contact and is working with the Chief Medical Examiner's office. During disasters like this, we do as much as we can to clear out all of the morgues to make room for the deceased and the victims. But those specific questions concerning numbers of deceased need to be addressed to the Chief Medical Examiner.
But your facility, your morgue, is not being used as a primary morgue at this point.
The Chief Medical Examiner is the primary receiving station for the deceased. And we are secondary. We're working with them as well as all the other HHC facilities that have mortuaries. And if it gets to the point where they need to go to the voluntary mortuaries, I'm going to hazard a guess and say that they would do that as well.
So
but that's a question that needs to be addressed to the Chief
Medical
Examiner.
One quick follow-up then. Aside from that one gentleman who died here, firefighter, I believe, is there anyone else who's been put into the morgue from the disaster scene?
There are a number of bodies that have been recovered by the Chief Medical Examiner that have been brought to the Chief Medical Examiner's office in mortuary.
Here?
Not here at Bellevue, but at 30th Street and First Avenue.
Is there anyone in intensive or critical care here?
We have.
We have, I believe we had 7 patients who went to the operating room yesterday. One of them is still in very, very critical condition. We have the rest of them would still be considered in critical condition, but they are improving.
With what types of injuries?
Yeah, what type of
Really a variety of things. Head trauma is all blunt-related trauma. Head trauma, broken bones, broken legs, broken arms, crush injuries, those sort of things. What was that again?
Before you mentioned that one is in critical condition.
Well, there are 7 that would be considered in critical condition, but one of those patients in very extremely critical condition. The other ones are in critical condition, but they are improving. The one patient is having a very difficult time.
Are there any children among the patients?
I believe all of the children have been discharged. We did have children yesterday, but I think they all have been discharged. They were seen, they were evaluated, and there were no serious injuries among the children.
Thank you.
Robert Hessler, Assistant Director of Emergency Services.
All right, you have just been listening to some of the officials from Bellevue Hospital describing the nature of some of the injuries sustained in the World Trade Center crashes yesterday, and in one of the more chilling reminders of what the city witnessed, some graphic information on how the morgues are being set up to handle the number of deceased. Once again, city officials are not confirming the number of dead. In fact, no one knows, obviously, because the number of folks still trapped inside the rubble. Some encouraging news this morning. Governor Pataki just confirmed, as did one of our own reporters, Gary Tuckman, that 2 folks, a man in his 50s and no description on the other person, are alive in the rubble, and rescue workers have every reason to believe they can get to them. Right now, we're going to continue my conversation with General Wesley Clark. Sir, we were talking a little bit about your frustration with the fact that the United States seemed to be caught off guard yesterday. How can that be? There were a number of reports that an Arab newspaper that was based in London, the editor there, was reporting that Osama bin Laden had been telegraphing this attack for some 3 weeks now. Now, we mean to make it clear that Osama bin Laden denies it had any involvement with this attack. Can you please unscramble this for us this morning?
Well, Osama bin Laden telegraphs a lot of moves, but it's in the intelligence community, there are literally dozens and dozens of hints and warnings and ambiguous statements. And so we're always searching for these, but often there's not enough information to respond in a particular fashion, and so one just stays alert. And here was there was an action that, in its scope, its coordination, the cunning with which it was pulled off, it's been unprecedented. It's something that our experts wouldn't have anticipated. It's a scenario that's out of a novel, as everybody has said, and it's going to change the way we view the total capabilities of the Osama bin Laden group. We've known for a long time that he's got a very extensive network. It's in a dozen or more countries. He's trained literally thousands of people and has many more thousands he can draw on for one-time missions as couriers. He's developed over a period of years a system of sleeper agents. He plans operations over a long period of time. They're obviously rehearsed. They work. We know in the attack on the Cove, for example, that there was a previous effort which failed some months before the attack of October of 2000 did succeed. And so we don't know how long this attack's been underway, but if we'd had indications, we certainly would have taken the measures that were necessary to protect the American people. I think we've known since February of 1998 that Osama bin Laden has declared war, a holy war on the United States and all of our people, military and civilian and families, and whether they're at home or abroad. And we didn't want to take this war to the American people and make it as public as Osama bin Laden has made it. Now it is war.
Are you telling me this morning, General, that there is no doubt in your mind that Osama bin Laden is connected to this, given the sophistication of the operation?
I think the consensus opinion from all of us who followed this is that Osama bin Laden probably is connected in some degree, but Osama bin Laden represents a complete terrorist network. He will have one or more state sponsors, countries that he's either based in or working in collusion with. There'll have been passport support, communication support. Osama bin Laden doesn't own 757 and 767 jets, but somebody has had skill in flying those aircraft. They were recruited by this network. Perhaps they were recruited first and then given practice in flying aircraft by someone who had access to them. We don't know those details yet. But what we do know is this was a very sophisticated terrorist act. It took a large network of planning, support, communications, and coordination to pull it off. And so as we look at this, we're going back to look at those agencies, those individuals that we know have been involved in operations of that magnitude, and his name's at the top of the list. He's a prime suspect, despite the fact that he's denied involvement. That also is a characteristic operating method for Osama bin Laden. He doesn't want to admit involvement. He doesn't want to do anything more to make himself a target. Neither do perhaps some of these states who may have supported him.
I have heard a number of politicians actually increase the heat in their criticism of counterintelligence efforts. They say the government has put far too much emphasis on technical intelligence, not enough emphasis on human intelligence. Is there any explanation for how it is that 4 hijackings took place within a couple-hour period?
Well, we'll all be asking that, Paula, and it'll take several days or weeks, months perhaps, to really sort through all of the causes and effects that were at work here. We know, for example, that we've had difficulty for years penetrating these terrorist groups. Many of them are family-based. They're people who grow up in certain areas. Their backgrounds are carefully vetted. They're screened. They're under observation continuously. So it's difficult to penetrate it. We put restrictions on our own intelligence agencies in terms of who we can operate with. We've done that over the last few years. That makes it even tougher. Some of these agents that probably were involved in this may have been in the United States for years, and so they may have eluded detection. We'll be asking all those questions, and they'll be asked to the right people, and the corrective policies, as best we can understand them, will be undertaken. But
General,
everyone will feel that sense of outrage. There's no doubt about it.
General, I just need a real brief answer to this one. How vulnerable does the United States continue to be?
We're vulnerable. We are vulnerable. And we don't know how vulnerable until we really understand how those people got on board and how they got their weapons and how they took over the aircraft. But we're vulnerable.
General Wesley Clark, thank you so much for your insights this morning. We're going to head back to Atlanta, where Miles O'Brien is standing by.
Thank you, Paula. There's perhaps no other nation on the face of the planet that knows more about dealing with terrorism than Israel. We're joined now by the former Prime Minister of Israel, Ehud Barak, in London this morning. Mr. Barak, if we could just start off with your general reaction to what we all witnessed yesterday.
The world is a different place to live in from yesterday morning. It is not just an attack against America, it's an attack against our whole civilization. It's time for action, not just for tough talk. And I believe that the American president should lead and will lead the whole world, the UK, the Europeans, Russia. Putin will cooperate, I'm confident. He experienced the price of terror on his own skin. The Australians, New Zealand, Israel, of course. The whole world should focus an effort on putting an end to it. It won't be an easy struggle. It will take few years. It should be a concerted effort, coordinated both on intelligence level, on operational level, and diplomatic and even economic level. Whoever support or hosts such groups as Osama bin Laden and other terror thugs should be automatically isolated from the family of nations.
Mr. Barak, we seem to be making an assumption here this morning that Osama bin Laden is the chief suspect here. Is there anybody else you would put on the list besides him, or do you think it is him and his cells?
Look, we cannot know at the moment, but it's quite probably that it is either bin Laden himself or some organization with certain relationship to his network. But even if it is another terror thug, basically for the world it's the same. When you will have the actual death toll numbers, you will realize that we, the whole world, free world, does not have any other alternative but to take all these rogue leaders, we know their names, it's Iraq, Iran, North Korea, Afghanistan, to a certain extent, Libya, maybe some other partial players, and we know all the names of the terror thugs from bin Laden down the Hezbollah, the Islamic Jihad, the Hamas, and other fundamentalists, and we know what should be done. We have an enormously capable intelligence community. Don't be kind of misled by the failure to give an early warning about this very attack. When the international community will focus its resources about these terror thugs, we will identify them. We'll clearly know whoever is ready to host them or sponsor them, and the world should be ready to act.
Mr. Barak, we saw so many chilling images yesterday, it's hard to even recount them all, but one which struck me was the sight of some Palestinians, many of them young people, cheering in the streets when they heard of the attacks. A little while ago, live here on CNN, Hannah Ashwari with the Palestinians, a spokesperson for the Palestinians, said not to judge the Palestinians by that initial reaction and the reaction of a minority. I'm curious what your response is.
You know, what you have seen in the streets of the Palestinians is the result of a continuous incitement that is carried on by the Chairman Arafat and his media instruments against Israel, against the free world, against America. It's pity to see that. I don't think that this is the main issue right now. It's quite painful to see how people are responding, but the real issue is to focus our energies and to wage this war the way our ancestors dealt with the piracy on the high seas, namely to make it a fully coherent effort to put an end to this phenomena. It will be painful. We will see more painful days like yesterday on the way. It will have ups and downs. It might take 10 years, but we will get rid of this phenomena if we are determined enough to reach this objective.
Former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak joining us from London. Thank you very much, sir. Paula.
Thanks so much, Miles. We are going to go back to Gary Tuchman, who is one of the few reporters who has been able to get as close as possible to the perimeter area of what used to be the World Trade Center, where rescue operations are underway. Gary, can you update us on the rescue of those two men that were identified earlier this morning?
We have been told by fire officials that at least 5 firefighters have now been rescued and a police officer who is critically burned. This right now is a New York
We obviously are having difficulty with this video phone. You do not know that with this being as fresh news as it is, some 22 hours after the crash, it's very difficult to establish any contact with that area in and around the World Trade Center. Miles, one of the things I'd like to share with our audience now is some new information that's come out, information that is going to continue to make the American public sick. The Associated Press is now reporting that into the night, the ferries carried loads of bodies across the Hudson River. This was a spokesman for Jersey City who provided this information. We understand that 3 cab companies actually ripped the seats out of their vans to help carry the dead to the military ocean terminal in Bayonne, New Jersey. This information continues to devastate anybody that lives in this city, anybody that lives in the nation for that matter, Miles. Once again, city officials have no idea what kind of reality they confront in the rubble of the World Trade Center. As you can see behind me this morning, there is still a shroud of smoke over what once was the Twin Towers, and buried or almost invisible in that cloud is the Statue of Liberty, perhaps one of the strongest symbols of American freedom. Gary, can we establish contact with you now?
Paula, can you hear me okay now?
Now I can. Yes, please update us, if you would, on the rescues taking place.
Let me explain what we're doing really quickly so our viewers understand. Because we are so close to the World Trade Center, we can't get a truck here that normally gives us our live signal. That's why we're on the video phone right now. This is the phone that you've seen us use before in China and in Antarctica before. It's a phone that you bring with you, a video phone that you bring with you to areas where you can't get a truck. And that's why we're talking on this telephone right now and giving you a signal on the video phone. What we told you, 5 firefighters have been rescued from under the rubble at the World Trade Center. In addition, an additional police officer has been rescued, but he has been seriously burned. With us right now, I'm going to have to put him on the telephone, but you'll see him talk, is Bill Duty. He's with the New York Fire Department. Tell me about the people who have been rescued, sir.
From what I understand, it happened last night. There were it was a company of firefighters. It was an officer and 5 firefighters survived the collapse. They wound up in a void, and they stayed there for maybe 5 or 6 hours. I guess they had enough air, and somehow they I don't know how they got to them, but they did work. They were able to get them out and pull them out. I don't know if they're injured or, as far as I know, they're alive.
Now, let me ask you about that void. Is there potential for more people to have survived in that void? You saw it.
Oh, absolutely. I didn't see the void, but, any void down there, there's a lot of potential for people to survive, especially underneath the first floor of the building. It goes down 5 or 6 stories with the train platforms and things. And there could be a lot of survivors.
So tell me how many hours you've been there.
I've been here since noon yesterday, so I don't know what time it is now, but...
Okay, so we're talking about right now 19 hours you've been there.
Yeah.
There's emergency vehicles, so we're going to get out of the way so we don't get run over here. Let me ask you, what is the scene like right there? Because we can't get right next to the building. We're a couple of blocks away from it right now.
It's just absolute devastation. It's just steel and rubble all over the place. There's about 4 or 5 inches of concrete ash. You really can't discern shapes or anything. It's just piles of garbage, and that's what they're using the cranes right now to pull up as much as they can and try and dig their way in and try and find one of these voids I was talking about where maybe we can find more people.
It's painful to talk about, sir, but have you seen victims, people who perished in this?
No, I haven't. There are scattered bodies around. I haven't seen any. We haven't gotten to any that I've seen yet, but I know of some that have been taken out.
And psychologically, how are you handling this?
Well, it's very tough. I have a lot of friends that I know were working yesterday, and they were up in that building yesterday, and I'm sure they perished in the building yesterday. And I'm sure as more news comes out, there'll be more and more people that I know that died, both for the fire department, police department, and that worked in the Twin Towers.
Bill Duty, thanks for joining us. We appreciate your time. We come to you, Paula, from Church Street. Church Street is a street that led right into the World Trade Center, just a couple of blocks away. This is a street where when I used to live in New York City, I used to rollerblade up and down this street, and it was a landmark. I knew that when I got to the World Trade Center building, I finished my 6 miles of rollerblading, and now you look down here, and all you see is that white cloud floating above there, and no more 2 110-story buildings. Paula, back to you.
Gary, I was touched by what your interviewee just had to say, and I guess the one piece of news that has been very difficult for New Yorkers to accept is the fact that yesterday they lost their fire chief and their deputy fire chief. What is the ripple effect of that kind of news?
I think people here still just can't believe it. We've talked to so many fire officials and police officials here who say, first of all, this has been a part of the skyline, the 2 World Trade Center buildings, since 1973. We're talking 28 years. You've had these 2 huge 110-story buildings on the end of Manhattan Island. So that in itself, the fact that these buildings are no longer here is startling. And now the fact that they know that there perhaps are thousands of people who have perished. We want to give you a look now down the street of where all the emergency officials are going, but that there are thousands of people who may have perished and whose bodies are still there. Many people are just having a very difficult time grasping the concept of that.
And Gary, we on the screen are focusing on some new information from the Associated Press that says now barges are in the process of carrying bodies to morgues across the river in New Jersey. Once again, I guess the only positive news this morning is the fact that 6 of these potential rescues are underway.
Paul, I think it's certainly positive news what we just told you about, that there have been rescues. But the fact is, there were so many people in that building that it's sad to say the odds favor that some people would survive something like this, that they would be in some type of void, and hopefully many more people will be found. So unfortunately, I don't think that's miraculous news. I hate using the word miracle in any story, but certainly not in this story. You would expect some people to survive. But unfortunately, we're going to find that a lot more people are going to have perished by the time this is all over.
Gary, I know you've had a chance to interview a number of people out there this morning. What is their biggest fear as they attempt more of these rescues this morning?
Well, I think the fear is, especially you just heard from Bill Duty, that they're going to personally find their friends who have perished in this. Remember, there are 300 firefighters still missing, 30, 40, 50, or 60 police officers still missing. And we've been dealing today with a lot of police officers, and we're very close to the scene right now, and a lot of the police officers, frankly, weren't so happy that we were so close. And we try to be as nice as possible. Obviously, we try to be nice in any emergency situation, but particularly this one, because we know these police officers perhaps lost personal friends in this tragedy. So it's a very difficult situation all the way around.
All right, Gary Tuchman, thanks so much for that update. We will continue to come to you throughout the morning, because you, of course, are closer to what is left of the World Trade Center than just about anybody out there on the street. Thanks so much for that update. Let's go back to Miles now in Atlanta.
Thank you, Paula. Let's bring folks up to date this morning, giving you an update on everything that has happened to date. The devastating airborne attacks on America's financial and military power now 23 hours ago or so. We begin our recap at Ground Zero. Rescue workers on the scene all night amid the carnage of the World Trade Center. 6 survivors were pulled from the rubble this morning. We just heard Gary Tuchman report to that effect. 5 firefighters, 1 police officer. About 1,100 people are being treated at local hospitals in the New York area, but many are still buried. The death toll is expected to climb into the thousands. There is some hope with the 5 sub-basements at the World Trade Center that there may be survivors in that rubble. Hope against hope. Just as the workday began yesterday, a hijacked jet ripped through one of the World Trade Center's 110-story towers. That was the first attack there. Minutes later, another jet tore through the second tower, as you see in that dramatic image. Both towers crumbled to the ground in a cloud of smoke and debris. Today, businesses, schools, and stock markets are closed. And meanwhile, in Washington, the site of another attack, authorities say as many as 800 employees may have been killed after another hijacked plane slammed into the Pentagon. It will be closed to all but essential personnel today. But most federal offices will be open for business. Congress will convene. The FAA is expected to keep all commercial flights grounded until at least noon today. We are watching that one very closely. About this time yesterday, President Bush was in Sarasota, Florida, at a school talking about his education plan. To say what a difference a day makes is a bit trite, I guess. The president last night, in a very stern speech from the Oval Office, brief but stern, said he would make no distinction between the terrorists and those who harbor them. Joining us now from the North Lawn of the White House is CNN's Kelly Wallace. Very pointed remarks, Kelly.
Absolutely, Miles. I'm likely to hear more from the president today. He has invited a bipartisan group of congressional leaders to meet with him later this morning. Part of the message there to show that Democrats, Republicans, all united behind the administration, that the work of the government will go on, and that the U.S. will do everything possible to find those responsible for these terrorist acts. And as you noted, Miles, the president saying that this administration not only holding those who committed these acts responsible, but those who harbor them or provide them some safe haven. To give you a sense of what's happening here, Miles, President Bush in the Oval Office at this hour. He arrived there just shortly after 7 a.m. Vice President Cheney, in fact, just pulling in to the White House driveway here. The president expected to begin his day meeting with his national security team, getting the latest on the investigation and the search and rescue efforts. Another big message coming from this White House today is that the U.S. government is doing everything it possibly can to assist with recovery operations in New York, in Pennsylvania, and of course outside Washington, D.C. at the Pentagon in Virginia. In fact, the president will be calling on Americans to do their part and donate blood. There will be a blood drive here at the White House, the Bloodmobile pulling into the White House driveway shortly around 7 a.m. The president and the First Lady expected to drop by that blood drive this afternoon, that for government workers, reporters, photojournalists to step in and donate blood. And Miles, as you know, of course, pictures really speak volumes on a day like this. I want to show you something our photographers shot probably around 6:30, 6:45 this morning. You can see flags at half staff above the White House, above the Eisenhower Executive Office Building, a message of the tragedy facing this country on this day. You obviously also see the tight security around the White House, around the perimeter, obviously very much concerned about what happened yesterday. And as you noted, Miles, the president going before the American people last night, obviously a very difficult moment for the president. He was to comfort the nation, but he also sent a message to those responsible for what he called acts of mass murder. Here is what Mr. Bush said in its entirety.
Good evening. Today, our fellow citizens, our way of life, our very freedom came under attack in a series of deliberate and deadly terrorist acts. The victims were in airplanes or in their offices, secretaries, businessmen and women, military and federal workers, moms and dads, friends and neighbors. Thousands of lives were suddenly ended by evil, despicable acts of terror. The pictures of airplanes flying into buildings, fires burning, huge structures collapsing, have filled us with disbelief, terrible sadness, and a quiet, unyielding anger. These acts of mass murder were intended to frighten our nation into chaos and retreat. But they have failed. Our country is strong. A great people has been moved to defend a great nation. Terrorist attacks can shake the foundations of our biggest buildings, but they cannot touch the foundation of America. These acts shattered steel, but they cannot dent the steel of American resolve. America was targeted for attack because we're the brightest beacon for freedom and opportunity in the world, and no one will keep that light from shining. Today, our nation saw evil, the very worst of human nature, and we responded with the best of America, with the daring of our rescue workers, with the caring for strangers and neighbors who came to give blood and help in any way they could. Immediately following the first attack, I implemented our government's emergency response plans. Our military is powerful, and it's prepared. Our emergency teams are working in New York City and Washington, D.C. to help with local rescue efforts. Our first priority is to get help to those who have been injured and to take every precaution to protect our citizens at home and around the world from further attacks. The functions of our government continue without interruption. Federal agencies in Washington, which had to be evacuated today, are reopening for essential personnel tonight and will be open for business tomorrow. Our financial institutions remain strong, and the American economy will be open for business as well. The search is underway for those who are behind these evil acts. I've directed the full resources of our intelligence and law enforcement communities to find those responsible and to bring them to justice. We will make no distinction between the terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbor them. I appreciate so very much the members of Congress who have joined me in strongly condemning these attacks. And on behalf of the American people, I thank the many world leaders who have called to offer their condolences and assistance. America and our friends and allies join with all those who want peace and security in the world, and we stand together to win the war against terrorism. Tonight, I ask for your prayers for all those who grieve, for the children whose worlds have been shattered, for all whose sense of safety and security has been threatened. And I pray they will be comforted by a power greater than any of us, spoken through the ages in Psalm 23. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me. This is a day when all Americans from every walk of life unite in our resolve for justice and peace. America has stood down enemies before, and we will do so this time. None of us will ever forget this day, yet we go forward to defend freedom and all that is good and just in our world. Thank you. Good night, and God bless America.
That was President Bush from the Oval Office last night. Miles, U.S. officials not commenting publicly about who they believe could be responsible for this, but senior administration officials briefing key members of Congress last night saying they are confident the evidence pointing to affiliates of Osama bin Laden. Miles.
CNN's Kelly Wallace at the White House, underscoring the difficult balance, of course, between political symbolism and security. Yesterday had to take a circuitous route back to Washington, stopping at 2 Air Force bases along the way, ultimately getting back to the Oval Office. Congress today will in fact convene, opening up a session. The political symbolism very ripe there. Paula.
Miles, thanks so much. Right now I am joined by Aaron Brown here in New York City, a man who spent over 9 hours here perched atop our platform here. You watched both World Trade Centers collapse yesterday. You watched building number 7 collapse as well. What are your thoughts this morning as New York wakes up to a completely different skyline?
It strikes me as both reporter and New Yorker that today is remarkably different. There was something sickeningly surreal about yesterday. At one point, turning around, you watch these buildings collapse and you say, that can't possibly be. If yesterday was surreal, today is all about reality. Today we're going to start to get a sense of the dimension of this. We're going to start to get a sense of how many people perished both 30 blocks away from us and in Washington as well. And when we start to get those numbers, this will no longer be about buildings that collapsed. It's going to be about lives that have been shattered, families that have been shattered. It all feels to me quite different. At various times yesterday, you'd look down on the street and there would be thousands of people standing on the corner staring at essentially nothing, just out there together as a single community. New York is a city of many communities. Someone said to me a little bit ago that when she left here very, very late last night, that she never felt safer in the city, that she felt connected to everyone.
Aaron Brown, thanks. I think you'll be dropping by throughout the morning. Even though you got precious little sleep, like most folks on duty around here last night. Thank you very much. Right now, we are going to head to Washington, where I am going to check in with Secretary of State Colin Powell. Sir, can you hear me?
Yes.
I know you have said that the attacks yesterday constituted an act of war, and the United States will treat this as if it is a war. What does that mean?
It means that we'll use our full resources to go after those who are responsible for this. And it is not an action that'll be over in a week or two. This has got to be a full-scale assault, not just by the United States, but by the civilized community against terrorism. And it has to be fought on the political front, it has to be fought on the diplomatic front, the military front, and the intelligence front. And we are deeply encouraged by the responses we have received so far from international organizations, but especially from countries around the world who have expressed solidarity with us and who have come to the realization, I hope, that all of us have to respond to this because none of us is safe from this kind of attack.
You have said
our hearts go out to those who lost their lives. This is a tragedy for our nation, but at the same time, we are a strong nation, we are a resilient nation, and we will come through this, and people will see what America is really capable of doing and capable of responding to.
Mr. Secretary, I know you have said that you will go after whoever is responsible for perpetrating these attacks. You will also go after those who might have harbored others involved in this attack. Where are you in the process of determining who was behind these attacks yesterday?
The intelligence community is hard at work, the CIA, the FBI, and other agencies assembling information, doing forensic work on at the 2 sites yesterday, and a body of evidence will be developed in the days ahead. And I don't think it'll take too long, but that process is well underway. But we don't want to start speculating or making a judgment now before we actually have the evidence.
Mr. Secretary, Senator Orrin Hatch was saying this morning that U.S. intelligence actually intercepted communications between Osama bin Laden supporters discussing the attacks. What can you tell us about these intercepted communications?
We should not be talking about intelligence methods used by the United States of America. All we do is put them at risk. So we should not be talking about such things, and I will not.
Are you suggesting that Senator Orrin Hatch has been irresponsible in floating this information?
We should not be talking about how the United States collects information in cases such as this.
Well, let me move on to this. What kind of group or groups do you think actually have the sophistication to pull off an attack of this magnitude?
It has to be a group that, one, has money, two, has, I think, a significant number of adherents, members. It has to have a network. It has to have the ability to move people around the world. So it is quite a sophisticated organization with a very sophisticated planning and execution capability. And I think the fingerprints are quite clear that it has to be an organization with that level of complexity associated to it. So it isn't your average fly-by-night car bomber. This is a sophisticated outfit.
Former Secretary of Defense William Cohen is saying this has the blueprints of an attack by someone perhaps involved with Osama bin Laden. Can you rule Osama bin Laden out this morning?
We rule no one out, and we will be ruling the perpetrators in the near future, I'm quite sure.
One last quick question. Can you explain how 4 hijackers were able to take over 4 airliners yesterday?
No, I cannot. Obviously, we need to do more with respect to security at our airports. We need to do more with respect to tracking people within a society that is an open society. And we have to do it in a way that protects us, but at the same time does not cause us to be a closed society, be the kind of society that would not be reflective of American values. And all of those issues are under consideration this morning and are being studied by various members of the administration.
Secretary Powell, good of you to join us. We know how taxing of last 22 hours you have had, or 23 hours. Thank you so much for being with us. Right now, I'm going to turn my attention to Richard Roth, who has some new information for us.
Yes, I'm a few blocks north of what was the Twin Towers of Manhattan, a New York and world icon. As you've been reporting earlier, those New Yorkers who have woken up from their nightmare, which proved to be true, have gone out and gotten some newspapers, and the 2 leading tabloids in New York City both calling it an act of war. For me, it's kind of eerily familiar. Nearly 11 years ago, I stood on a rooftop in Tel Aviv with Israeli newspapers saying almost the exact same headlines and words as Iraq attacked that evening and war started in the Persian Gulf. Behind me, you see what was left of part of the 7 buildings in the World Trade Center complex. The towers dedicated in '73, they never fully opened until 1976. World Trade number 7, more than 40 stories, was the last to go yesterday. This, what you're looking at, is the heart of New York and, in effect, the world's financial center, though a lot of transactions are done electronically. Down here in Lower Manhattan, Wall Street shut down, power turned off to these giant skyscrapers, streets deserted, ghost town effect. In the area of where the blast occurred from the commercial jetliners, it's like a nuclear winter. Ash, soot piled on top of cars 3 inches deep, firefighters covered with it. Of course, in the rubble, New York estimates more than 250 firefighters believe lost and trapped. Reports still, of course, of some cell phone communications from those who perhaps are still trapped in some of the lower structures. There are rescue vehicles and personnel from states surrounding New York and all through the Midwest and the South. Salvation Army units from Pennsylvania spotted, from Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, with coffee and cold drinks for tired, exhausted rescue workers going through the night. Mini street kitchens set up. There's a real beehive hub of activity. You may not be able to see it on this street, but further on the west side of Manhattan near the Hudson River, that's sort of where ground zero outposts have been established. Papers, financial folders, the ways of business from desks, offices, from the 2 giant structures over 100 stories tall, still cascade into the area. Smoke, of course, what you're seeing billowing up. Soon we're going to be coming up on 24 hours since the planes attacked. 78 police officers still feared dead. One insurance company estimating that perhaps more than 1,000 of their employees have yet to be accounted for. New York City still just beginning now to grapple with exactly what happened. Of course, New Yorkers have been advised not to come to work. Thus, all of the surrounding streets of Manhattan at this hour, which would normally be incredibly humming and busy, are deserted. And people are staying in and presumably watching television. Bodies have been taken to various triage facilities and hospitals along New York's west side. Blood centers have been established, things like that. Paula.
Richard, I have to admit to you, your audio was distorted at the top of your report. Would you like to reprise the first 30 seconds or so of your report? Because we didn't capture that.
Well, I was holding up the two of the leading tabloid newspapers from New York, where I presumably saw It's War, and says the New York Daily News, and active war, World Trade Center destroyed, many dead, according to the New York Post. And I was relating how that was, for me, eerily familiar. It was just like what happened nearly 11 years ago on the roof in downtown Tel Aviv after Iraq struck near the Israeli Defense Ministry, and war had erupted a day earlier in the Persian Gulf. And that's pretty much what I was saying, Paula. And of course, here in downtown New York, a lot of activity at the site, the smoke. Some fear asbestos, PCBs, other poisonous substances, but nothing really confirmed yet. And of course, thousands of rescue workers down there, New York City, trying to dig out whoever could be saved in the rubble.
All right, Richard Roth, thank you for reporting that twice. As you can imagine, it is very difficult to establish any sort of communications close to that perimeter area around what used to be the World Trade Center. We're going to take a short pause here, and our coverage will continue.
This is CNN.
$8 a.m. on the East Coast, 5 a.m. on the West Coast, 23 hours, 15 minutes after everything seemed to change. From the CNN Center in Atlanta and from our reporters in New York, Washington, and all over the world, our coverage of America under attack continues here on CNN. I'm Miles O'Brien in Atlanta.
Good morning, Miles, and I'm Paula Zahn joining you from New York City this morning. New Yorkers just beginning to grasp the magnitude of what their city went through yesterday. I want to show you behind me what the scene looks like today. Smoke continues to billow out of the area where the World Trade Center towers once existed, twin 107-story towers, the third building collapsing yesterday as well. This morning, there is a ray of hope. Rescuers are reporting that they have found 5 firefighters and a policeman alive under the rubble earlier today. We also believe that 2 other victims, we are told, had established contact with their families overnight on their cell phones. There is reason to believe they may be found, but the other news is going to make all of you sick. The mayor expects the fatality numbers to be horrendous. He calls them, quote, very, very high. We have reports of barges carrying victims, the deceased, across the river from New York City into New Jersey. There were reports last night of ferries carrying loads of bodies across the Hudson River. 3 cab companies ripping out the seats from their vans to help carry the dead to the military ocean terminal in Bayonne, New Jersey. We're going to check in with Gary Tuchman right now, who is closer than just about anyone to ground zero. Gary, we join you very close to 23 plus hours since the first attack here on New York City. What can you tell us about these rescues?
And Paul, that brings up the point, 23 hours you're talking about. This was the hour in which this happened yesterday. Yesterday at this time, everything was completely normal where I'm standing, right next to where the World Trade Center complex used to stand. People were going to work. People were walking into the World Trade Center complex, many of them for the very last time ever. What we're being told right now by authorities, they're updating the information to us, that 6 firefighters and 1 police officer have been rescued in the early morning hours. We're told the 1 police officer was seriously burned. but 7 different emergency officials have been rescued this morning. Last night, 2 police officers were rescued, so a total of 9 people, according to medics and emergency officials we talked to, have been rescued right now, and there is hope that at least 2 more are in the process of being rescued as we speak. But right now I stand here on Church Street, just north of where the 2 110-story buildings used to stand, and emergency officials are going in and out. We just saw about 2 minutes ago 2 incinerated cars brought out in the back of a flatbed truck. You couldn't even recognize that they were cars. They were completely melted. On the streets are a couple of inches thick of dust and grime and dirt that have flown from the buildings over the last 24 hours since this terrible accident happened. And one thing you have to keep in mind about this, you keep hearing these were huge office buildings. These were like cities. 50,000 people work inside these buildings, 2 110-story buildings. That's 220 stories of buildings in this complex. It was a huge megaplex. The bottom level itself of the World Trade Center complex had a subway station, also had a train station called the PATH station, that stands for Port Authority Trans-Hudson. It took New Jersey commuters to New York City every day, and then a shopping mall with dozens of stores and restaurants. On the bottom level alone, there are thousands of people, and we're talking about 220 stories. So it really shows you the terrible horror of all this.
Gary, before you go any further, I think I need to clarify that the statistics at the bottom of our screen right now actually can't keep up with the information you are reporting. Once again, you are confirming that in fact 7 survivors have been found, right? 6 firefighters, 1 police officer.
One thing I want to stress, Paula, oftentimes we are not comfortable with facts unless we see them with our own eyes. We have a lot of very nervous, very anxious, very sad, very traumatized emergency officials coming out and giving us this information. They tell us they are sure that there are 6 firefighters, 1 police officer rescued early this morning. We haven't seen it with our own eyes. We are taking their words for it, and that literally is all we can do because we are not allowed right next to the scene right now. But that is what emergency officials are telling us. 6 firefighters, 1 police officer rescued this morning, 2 police officers rescued last night for a total of 9.
All right. I think I need to mention that because I think these numbers are going to conflict throughout the day. You are closer to the pool of information than anyone, and we're going to rely on your numbers. Gary, one thing that I wanted to add at this point is the American Red Cross now has opened 12 shelters in New York City. Each is staffed with mental health professionals and nurses. And one of the points you were making earlier on is that the news that New York City has lost over 250 firefighters. They were among the 400 that were first sent in, and maybe as many as 85 police officers is hitting rescue workers darn hard. Are there any mental health professionals anywhere in that area to give support to these rescuers have the very tough job to going into this area of devastation?
Oh, good question. What we have been told by emergency officials that there are mental health professionals who are on the site who are available for discussions when people need.
Okay, Gary, I think you're breaking up. Let me see if you're still with us. Gary, you still there? Okay, we've lost Gary. We will come back to him a little bit later on this morning. Before we head back to Atlanta, I wanted to quickly recap what the status of life is like here in New York City. The NASDAQ, the Dow Jones closed, all public schools are closed, parochial schools, private schools, everything, all the businesses south of 14th Street, which is many blocks south of here, are closed. We know that the Empire State Building will remain closed. The Hudson River bridges and tunnels expected to be closed inbound. The Postal Service has suspended mail collection from blue postal boxes in 3 different bureaus. Miles, I'm sure you will continue to report this after all this morning, that all U.S. embassies and U.S. forces around the world have been put on high alert. One thing I wanted to mention as well, Miles, before you take this away, that the U.S. Navy is indeed sending aircraft carriers, the USS George Washington, the USS John F. Kennedy to the coast off of New York, and 5 other ships, including some guided missile destroyers and frigates, have also been sent to sea to reduce the number of ships in port. So that is the latest from here in New York, besides the fact that 750 National Guard troops have reported to armories throughout the city. Miles?
Well, Paula, before you get away, let me ask you a quick question. I might be a bit presumptuous here, assuming you went home. When you came to work in the wee hours this morning, did you have the sense that it seemed like a typical day, if you will, in New York? Was traffic such as it would be in a typical morning?
No, the streets were empty, and usually there's a pretty good pulse going here at 5 o'clock in the morning. I stopped by a deli to grab a cup of coffee and a stale bagel, I might add. And there were 4 or 5 people in line trying to also buy some breakfast and get a little caffeine. And I would say that everybody was in stunned silence. People weren't even talking to each other. So clearly, not as many people are on the streets because a lot of companies told their employees not to come to work. So it's a distinctly different city today. And I think as the reality of the number of fatalities set in, this city will be forever changed. It's just the images that we witnessed here yesterday will be forever burned into our collective consciousness.
All right, Paula, we'll get back to you in just a bit. One of those days where we talk about it being before and after. Let's recap for just a moment. The horrifying images of the attack will, of course, be etched in our minds forever. It began just about 24 hours ago when the first airliner slammed into one of the World Trade Center towers. American Airlines Flight 11, Boston to Los Angeles, was the intended itinerary. There you see the impact on the first tower, the North Tower of the World Trade Center. These are some late pictures we received overnight showing the attack from a slightly different angle. The huge fireball erupted as the jet tore through the building. Now, 18 minutes later, we have several angles on this attack. The second plane, this is a United Airlines Flight 175, also Boston, Los Angeles, its intended itinerary. It ripped into the South Tower. Both towers later collapsed into piles of rubble. The rubble we've been showing you all this morning. These are the dramatic scenes as the clouds of gray smoke enveloped lower Manhattan, causing a virtual stampede of rescue workers, members of the media who had responded to the scene. As the heroic search and rescue effort unfolds, an American flag stood amid the devastation. Let's send it back to Paula in New York.
All right, Miles, thanks so much. Right now, we're going to go to Joe Alba, who is the director of the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Sir, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Good morning, Paula.
Can you explain to us what you're going to be up to today?
Well, right now I'm in Washington making sure that we have all the resources that are necessary, both in the D.C. area, Pentagon, Northern Virginia, and for New York City. I've spoken with Governor Pataki, Governor Gilmore, Mayor Giuliani. They have what they need right now. Yesterday afternoon, I activated 12 urban search and rescue teams, 8 for New York City, 4 for Northern Virginia. They're on the ground or on their way right now. Our focus is still in a response mode, and that would be to identify, if we can, those that are still alive and remove them from the rubble.
Can you explain to us what these urban rescue teams are capable of doing, perhaps, that other rescue operators are not?
Well, they are highly trained search and rescue individuals from all over the United States. We have 28 national teams. We will use all the resources we possibly can. I'll be going to New York City this afternoon to make sure that we're doing exactly what we need to do. I think everyone understands the gravity of the situation. We have a huge task ahead of us. I'm concerned for those law enforcement officials and New York City firefighters who will be almost at the end of 24 hours in a few minutes. They'll be getting tired. We need to be rotating fresh troops in and out, making sure we continue during this time of need.
You will be briefing Congress later today, correct?
I will indeed, bringing them up to date on what we've done and what we will need in the near future.
What will you be asking for from Congress? Do you need additional funds?
Probably some additional funding right now. We're at the tail end of our current fiscal year. We've had numerous tropical storms. This is a tragedy that strikes at the heart of our entire country, and I'm sure Congress will make sure that all needs are met.
And I know, Mr. Alba, you say you are bringing in highly talented, specialized teams to assist in the rescue efforts here.
That's
what
correct.
do you think will be the biggest challenge that you and your team will encounter?
The biggest challenge right now are identifying those individuals who need assistance right now, either temporary housing or emergency cash, I would urge those individuals who have been affected directly by this tragedy to call our 800 number, 462-9029, 800-462-9029. If you need immediate assistance, identifying those folks are going to be a difficult challenge. But more importantly, we need to get to those individuals who are still alive in the building, in the rubble, and we'll do that.
And the most encouraging news, Mr. Albaugh, is that our Gary Tuckman is reporting that 6 firefighters have been rescued, 1 police officer in addition to 2 police officers last night, bringing the total to 9 victims rescued from the rubble of the World Trade Center.
And that gives us hope for others that will be alive, which has to be our focus. And I know everyone's doing their best to get to those individuals as quickly as they can.
Mr. Albaugh, thank you very much for your time. Good luck.
Thank you, Paula.
And no one is more hopeful than the mayor of New York City, Rudy Giuliani, that more victims will be found inside the rubble. Cell phone contact has been made, or at least was made in the wee hours of the morning, between 2 victims and their family members. The mayor will be holding a news conference in just about 15 minutes. It is very tough to schedule things on time right now, given the enormity of what this city is trying to grasp right now. We will bring that news conference to you live. But right now we're going to go to Bob Franken, who joins us from the Pentagon. Bob, there were reports this morning that sources were telling CNN that they believe as many as 800 people may have died in the crash yesterday, the attack on the Pentagon.
Well, that was one local fire chief. The Pentagon officials, in fact, say that that figure is probably way higher than it's going to be, but they acknowledge that it could be in the hundreds. As a matter of fact, they've already recovered some bodies. We haven't been told how many. Police say that they're blocking one roadway around here because a temporary mortuary has been set up there. We're told that even with the fire still smoldering, some search teams went in overnight, that there are search dogs who are here. They're going to determine when they can go in again. Of course, there have been flames that have erupted sporadically, and that has slowed things down. Now, it is shortly after 8 o'clock in the morning in Washington, and at 8 o'clock, part of the Pentagon opened up for work. It was very important to the Defense Secretary that he show the world that this building, in spite of the catastrophe that occurred yesterday, in spite of that the Pentagon would be up for business. But only about half of it could be open because there were concerns that the structural damage that might have occurred in the other parts of the building would make things too difficult and too dangerous for the other people. But at 8 o'clock, the Pentagon opened up. It was very important, officials said, that the press office be open so reporters could locate there. CNN has a team there where we, of course, cover what's going on out here. And what's going on out here is the search, the very grim search to find out just how many people became victims of this terrorist act. Paula?
Bob, is there any new information about the flight that went down outside of Pittsburgh and what the ultimate target was supposed to have been?
Well, it's more speculation than information. There was some talk early on, according to briefings that were held for congressional leaders, according to Capitol Hill sources, some talk that the target was Camp David, but that's really given short shrift. There is other belief, though, that either the White House or more likely the U.S. Capitol was going to be a target. What they don't know is why the plane did not, in fact, continue. That's one of the mysteries that's going to have to be sorted out. Of course, there's so many, that is just one.
All right, Bob, one last question for you before we move on. Secretary of State Powell was on the air with me a short while ago and seemed to indicate that he was upset. That might not be the right word, but that Orrin Hatch is saying that U.S. intelligence actually intercepted communication between some almost Osama bin Laden supporters discussing the attacks. How sensitive of an issue is that there this morning?
Well, there, of course, is going to be a real reappraisal as things go on. Another way to put that will be second guessing. People are going to look back and say, why didn't we act on X information or Y information? And apparently there were indicators out there. We've talked to newspaper editors, we being CNN, around the world about the warnings that had been issued. Of course, there have been so many warnings over time by various terrorist organizations that sometimes it's difficult for intelligence officials to figure out which ones were real. And of course, they sadly now realize this one was very tragically real.
The Secretary of State made it quite clear, though, that he will never talk to us about this intercepted material.
Well,
do you expect that to change?
Oh, you have a situation where the intercepted material is done by the National Security Agency. That is a hypersensitive intelligence organization. As a matter of fact, it has tried to enforce a couple of times when there's been reporting about its activities, tried to enforce criminal prosecution for doing that very thing. So it probably will never be directly divulged by a member of government, but these things do have a way of becoming publicly known, particularly since there is bound to be such a heated debate over what should have happened.
All right, Bob, I wasn't able to catch the last part of what you had to say, but I wonder, do you think the Pentagon folks there are concerned that with folks that have the stature of Senator Orrin Hatch talking about these intercepted communications, that there will be more political fallout?
Oh, there's bound to be political fallout, but of course it's too early for that right now. The nation is caught up in the tragedy and the immediate work that has to be done in the aftermath of that. I should point out also that there is probably a very, very heightened alert today to make sure that somehow there is not some second-day effort to try and further plunge the United States into despair. But as this goes on, there are going to be any number of debates about what should have happened, what could have happened to possibly avoid this. Debates that are going to be viewed by some as second-guessing and by others as a real cry to change not only the way that our intelligence apparatus works, but the way that our communication and travel systems work.
All right, Bob Franken, thanks so much for that update. We are back here in New York City, where I'm going to quickly show you a shot of the World Financial Center. There appears to be smoke billowing from either the roof or the top part of the building. We have absolutely no information as to what is going on, but that is very close to what used to be the World Trade Center area. We're going to move on now to Gary Tuchman, who joins us once again with an update on the rescue operations now underway. Gary, anything new?
Paul, first things first, I just want to tell you that we cannot see the World Financial Center from our vantage point here, so I can't tell you anything more about that smoke that you see there. All we see is the holes where the World Trade Center buildings used to stand, and that's all we could see from our vantage point. And as I'm talking to you, I'm taking a walk right now, and I'm on the corner of Church and Chambers Streets, and I'm looking at a subway station, and the subway station says on it, Chambers Street / World Trade Center. That's the name of the stop. And it's just hard to believe that the World Trade Center buildings no longer stand when you look at that stop that tens of thousands of people literally use every day. And in the very same corner, it's chilling. We see 5 Army National Guard members standing there. They're standing there with their helmets and their green fatigues, and it's a sight we never thought we would see in the United States, in New York City, anywhere in this country. It almost looks like a state of siege as they stand there right now at attention, looking out for anything suspicious. We've reported to you, and we're going to continue to report that survivors have been found. 6 firefighters have been found in these early morning hours. 1 policeman's been found from the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. The Port Authority, by the way, is the department that runs the airports, Kennedy, LaGuardia, and Newark, runs the bus terminal here in New York City, and also was the landlords of the World Trade Center buildings. That police officer who was found today was seriously burned, we are told. In addition, 2 police officers were found yesterday. Now, the governor of the state of New York, George Pataki, has been at the scene for many hours. As a matter of fact, he used to have an office in the World Trade Center building. He very well may have been in that building if the office was still there. However, the governor's office had moved out of that building. He spends most of his time in Albany, the state capital. But Governor Pataki did talk to reporters early this morning.
All right, Gary, I was expecting to hear from Governor Pataki right there. He joined us at the top of the broadcast at 7 o'clock this morning and sort of walked us through the paces of what we can expect to happen throughout the day. And he sort of reinforced what Joe Albaugh just told us, the head of FEMA, that 8 special urban rescue teams will be sent here to assist the New York Metro trying to rescue those folks. Give us your understanding of what actually has to take place to get to potential survivors, the digging process, what they have to weed through, what they have to be afraid of.
I mean, what you have here, Paula, are two 110-story buildings and a 47-story building. That was the 7 World Trade Center building. That's something I have to emphasize that I think a lot of people didn't realize. Even people in New York City, when they think of the World Trade Center, they thought of these two beautiful, tall buildings. It's a complex of many buildings, and 7 World Trade Center is considered a very small building because it was next to these two huge buildings, but it was 47 stories tall. So you have all the concrete and steel and wreckage from more than 267 stories of buildings that are on the ground, and some of the wreckage is piled 10 feet tall. So you're talking about people who are buried under a lot of rubble, tons of rubble. But what the authorities are telling us is they are saying there are voids, so-called voids, that are holes where wreckage may have fallen, but these people may be below the wreckage in holes and pits. And that's why they're hopeful they will indeed find more survivors. As of now, we're reporting that 9 survivors have been found, but we're also told that they have been able to contact 2 additional people, and one of them is a 50-year-old man. The other man they're not describing, but they are saying that there are at least 2 more survivors, so they are very hopeful they'll be able to find more in these so-called voids.
How many folks would you say are involved in rescue operations at the moment?
It's hard to tell, Paul. We're not able to be right up to the site, although I am able to see the people in the background right now. And I can tell you that there are hundreds of people here. We did know that Mayor Giuliani, Rudy Giuliani, and ironically, they were supposed to have yesterday the primary here for the new mayor of this city yesterday. They canceled that primary, and it turns out the current mayor was in the news all day yesterday. But Mayor Giuliani said they had all the help they need. So although it doesn't seem like an immense amount to us with the amount of people we've seen going in and out, they are saying that they have all the help they need right now down there. But it looks like hundreds of people to us, but not perhaps the thousands that you might expect.
Gary, as you've been talking, we've been trying to get more information. We're going to go to this shot very quickly. The World Financial Center. This is a large business center directly across the street from what used to be the Twin Towers, the World Trade Center. There does appear to be a lot of smoke coming from the top floors of the building. I know you're going to continue to effort some information on this as well. We wish we could confirm for you what started this smoke. We can at this point, but we promise you we will continue to keep you updated on that throughout the morning.
Paula, can I tell you one thing? With me right now, and this is unorthodox, but this is important for us to get the information out. I have a gentleman standing with me. He's with the Nassau County Police Emergency Service Unit. Nassau County is in Long Island. It's one of the 2 counties in Long Island. He was part of the team that pulled one of the survivors out. He was above the 80th floor in one of the World Trade Center towers. And I want to talk to him really quick. Can you tell me your name, sir?
Sergeant Robert Bressingham.
Sergeant, tell me what you saw when you were at the scene.
Well, there was a concerted effort by everybody involved with the fire department, police department, emergency rescue units, and we were focusing on attempting to get one police officer that we had located. He had used his cell phone, and he was able to get rescuers to his location, which was deep in some rubble, but he was able to coordinate it because he was very knowledgeable of the building. He was a Port Authority police sergeant. Once he was located, he was about waist-high in debris and in a very, very tight quarters. Only one officer was able to crawl in at a time and was able to dig him out real slowly.
How is his condition right now?
From what I understand, at the scene, he was conscious and alert, and I'm sure that he has injuries, but I don't believe there are any life-threatening injuries.
Where in the rubble or the building was this?
He was in the courtyard, which was in between the 2 towers from the collapse. I don't know which building he was before the collapse.
Is there any updated information, sir, about the number of survivors that have been found there?
No, there's no updated numbers. There's no compilation of numbers right now.
The final question for you, sir, how psychologically are you handling this, being at the scene, being in the tower? How are you handling it?
Well, the rescue community is a very tight community. We know a lot of people that didn't make it. We were very happy to be able to help somebody that did make it. So we're real happy that we were able to put our efforts together and at least make it successful with one rescue so far at this point.
Sergeant, thanks for joining us. We appreciate it. You can tell there are people from not just New York City, because Nassau County, as I said, is in Long Island. There are people from jurisdictions all over the New York area right now helping out in this tragedy. Paula?
Gary, as I heard you do this interview, and we continue to look up at some of these more close-up pictures of the rubble, it is an absolute miracle that anybody has been found alive in this rubble.
There's no question about it, Paul, and that's the sad fact of this, is that when this is all said and done, and it may take days, it may take weeks, that we're going to probably find that 99% of the people who they're looking for right now are not alive. So we're very thankful for the people they do find alive, but we're not expecting to hear any stories like, we can't believe the number of people we found alive. It's not a very likely scenario that it's going to be a great number of people.
And once again, Gary, just quickly recap for us the overall number of folks have been rescued. It's 9 altogether. Break that down for us.
Right. Authorities are telling us that in the early morning hours, since midnight Eastern time, 6 New York City firefighters have been rescued and 1 Port Authority police officer. And apparently the police officer that the sergeant we just talked to was telling us about, that police officer and that's the good news. That's something we didn't know. We were told he had serious burns. The sergeant is telling us that he does not believe the burns are life-threatening. So that is good news. We also know that last night 2 additional police officers were also rescued. So that's a total of 9 people that authorities have confirmed to us have been rescued. In addition, 2 other people are now being searched for, their voices. They even know the age of one of the people. That would make a total of 11 if they do find those 2 additional people.
And Gary, one of those 2 is the one we believe to have that had established cell contact with his family.
Yeah, well, you know, nice to know that it perhaps wasn't, because that would mean there are 2 more people. So we don't know that for sure. That's what people are surmising, but we don't know that for certain.
All right, Gary, we're going to let you go. We're going to head over to St. Vincent's Hospital, where the paramedics there are holding a news conference on the status of their operations.
I've also gotten more information. Our hospitals in the system, St. Vincent Catholic Medical Centers, in the outer boroughs, received 65 patients in total, and the 1 fatality that I spoke to you about before. I have Dr. Jesse Blumenthal, the head of trauma, just to bring you up to date on some of the things we've been seeing overnight in the emergency room. And then we have 2 of our paramedics, Tony Suarez and Phil. I'm going to let Phil pronounce his last name. We'll give you those spellings if you need them later. These 2 gentlemen were on scene from 9 a.m. yesterday until last night. They can tell you a little bit about their experiences as paramedics at the scene, and then we'll open for questions. Sure.
Live right now. Tell us about reports of possible survivors and possibly being lost.
We have heard some reports that there were survivors taken out of the building within the last hour. We did receive a call from EMS that we should be prepared, but later reports have told us that if there are anybody that needs hospitalization, we may not be receiving them. So, possibly Bellevue would be one possible scenario, yes. Okay, Doctor, just a little bit about what we saw overnight.
Well, unfortunately, we wish we had more patients to treat that came in overnight because, again, there was difficulty in getting to the scene, and I think the paramedics will describe that. But we have been busy taking care of the patients that we did receive. The three of the severe burns were transferred to the Cornell Burn Center. We have automatic transfer agreements between hospitals, and again, taking care of severe burns is a tremendous logistical strain. We have other lesser burns which we're caring for. We're in the process of actually visiting and getting data on all the patients that were admitted. Additional 2 patients went to the operating room last night because of fractures, soft tissue injuries, lacerations, and the like. We're in the process, obviously, of reviewing all the patients, and a couple of patients will probably be ready for discharge. But I think the staff, as unfortunately, was anticipating and hoping that we would receive survivors during the night, and I think everyone was very disappointed that we did not. Again, everyone is in a high state of preparedness. We continue to have calls of volunteers throughout the night, and even this morning, and at least we were able to thank them and record this and tell them that we really had enough staff. But again, even the community responding with food was very gratifying to all the staff that was up most of the night.
I'm going to have our paramedics come in and just tell you a little bit about their experiences, then we'll take questions.
Hi, paramedic Iggy Gurens. The paramedic Iggy Gurens. The initial sight was just horrible. I'm just wishing well for everybody that's down there, all my colleagues, everybody else that's giving help. Like I said, it's just a horrible sight. It's a horrible day, and I wish everybody well, and we're here to do whatever as much as we can.
Hi, paramedic Tony Suarez, St. Vincent's. Initially, I was there for about 15 minutes. There were a couple explosions. It became dangerous. We grabbed one person. We commandeered an ambulance and just hightailed it out of there. My prayers are to the fellow firefighters, EMS, police officers that have died, and hopefully we'll be able to get some more out of there. We weren't able to get to the scene simply because it was very unsafe. So please, if you can, everybody, please pray for those that have fallen today.
Can you be specific about what you saw?
I was only at the scene for a little while, but it was unsafe. And basically, I heard one explosion and basically just hightailed it out of there. It was very unsafe for everybody, and that's the only thing that I saw. I mean, I had one patient. We grabbed her, put her in the ambulance. She was full of soot. She was covered from head to toe with ashes, and basically dropped her off to a site and then went back to the command center.
I think if it wasn't for the first patient I took out, Jenny, who we took to Cornell, I would probably not be here right now. She was just covered in second, third degree burns, and we just got her out of there. And I hope she's doing well.
Sir, could you explain a little bit about what the paramedics do in terms of stopping every 45 minutes or so to listen and how they proceed?
I don't understand the question.
One of the doctors here was saying that you stop or so every 45 minutes to check and see if you hear anything new to try to find out if there could be anybody in the rubble.
Oh, well, we're just listening to the radios. I mean, we're just listening. Oh, and at the scene right now?
Listening for sounds inside.
Yeah, they're listening for sounds. We're not there right now, but I understand they're just listening to make sure there's anybody caught in any type of voids, and any pockets, if they're alive, if they hear any sound. That's what they're doing right now. Excuse me.
Any other questions?
Did you get a spelling?
Eguigurens, E-G-U-I-G.
All right, you have just heard some of the first accounts coming from paramedics describing what they were up against in treating many of those injured in the twin attacks here in New York City yesterday. One of the paramedics describing the scene as just horrible. One of the administrators of St. Vincent's Hospital, which is one of the area hospitals where a large number of the victims were taken, describing the level of support the hospital is getting from volunteers in the area. I think that level of support has been repeated elsewhere in the city. I was on the phone yesterday with a couple hospitals confirming the fact that they couldn't even handle the number of people who would come to the hospital to donate blood. There is still a dire need of blood in New York City to treat these victims. Miles, once again, even the mayor, who will shortly be holding a news conference here, is very troubled in trying to get a better grasp of exactly what we're dealing with here. The only good news to come out of New York City this morning is the news that Gary Tuchman has been reporting all morning long, that it appears as though 9 people have been rescued from the rubble, some 6 firefighters this morning, a police officer this morning, in addition to 2 police officers last night, and there is reason to believe that 2 more victims trapped in the rubble will be successfully rescued this morning. So we're going to keep you updated on that. As you know, Miles, I know you saw the stories that one of these victims actually established cell phone contact with a family member last night. I can't imagine anything more chilling. When you look at this rubble, as we had all morning long, it seems an absolute miracle that anybody could survive the crush of 2 107-story towers unfolding on them.
Truly, the word miraculous is probably a bit overused. Normally it applies in this case. Let's move on just a little bit. The name Osama bin Laden has been used all this morning as we talk about the short list of potential suspects for this dramatic, well-choreographed attack. The short list, really, he and his organization involving thousands at the top of it. And they are harbored, it is widely known, in Afghanistan by the Taliban. We are joined now live via video phone from Kabul, Afghanistan, by CNN's Nick Robertson. Nick?
Well, Miles, certainly a lot of attention focused on Afghanistan at this time because of Osama bin Laden. We have been told by diplomats here that senior Pakistani officials are at this moment meeting with senior Taliban government officials. Now, Pakistan is one of the only 3 countries to have recognized Taliban as the rightful rulers of Afghanistan, and Pakistan is regarded by many countries as perhaps one of those countries that has the greatest influence over the Taliban. We don't know the content of those meetings at this time. However, we can confirm that meetings between senior Pakistani and senior Taliban officials are going on at this time. It has been, however, in Kabul today and elsewhere in Afghanistan, a day of apprehension for many.
Fearing what might come next after the attacks on the United States, international aid groups began pulling out of Kabul by early morning. The German charity group Agro Action, one of the first to leave. United Nations operations here also virtually closing down as key staff leave, a procedure followed in the past for safety when regional tensions are high. Apprehension also in Afghanistan's Taliban leadership. Foreign Minister Wakil Ahmed Mutawakil quick to explain their position after the attacks in America.
The Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan has always expressed its condemnation of terrorism. Afghanistan has also been targeted with terrorism, and we have been victims of terrorism. We condemn it here and internationally. Terrorism is frightening and creates hatred.
With suspicion of responsibility falling on Osama bin Laden, Mutawakil's government, well aware the implications bin Laden's involvement would have for the Taliban, was keen to say bin Laden was not responsible.
So far, no one has officially accused us. If anyone has brought up his name, it is because his reputation of the past.
Overnight, the already tense atmosphere raised by an air raid on Kabul, illuminating the sky with rocket and anti-aircraft fire. An ammunition dump hit and 2 planes at Kabul airport destroyed in an attack by the Taliban foe, the Northern Alliance.
Well, for most people here, it really is life as normal. The departure of the aid workers will fuel fears about the future, but many Afghans here are impoverished after 20 years of war, and they have few other options really than to sit tight and just wait and see what happens, Miles.
CNN's Nick Robertson, exclusively live from Kabul, Afghanistan. Let's talk now about give you a quick recap. There were 4 airliners in all involved in this coordinated attack. 2 of them, of course, we've been telling you about just recently, plowed into the World Trade Center. A third, American Airlines Flight 77, a 757, was to fly from Dulles Airport to Los Angeles. Instead, struck the Pentagon. CNN's Bob Franken is in front of the Pentagon now with the latest from there. Bob.
And we have some further information on the search effort to try and find out just how many casualties there are, and of course also to see if it's entirely at all possible that there might be some survivors in the rubble of the crash, the plane that was hijackers crashed into the Pentagon. You can see that, of course, in back of me. What we have been told by Mike Tamilo, who is a battalion chief with the Fairfax County Fire and Rescue Unit. That's the worldwide unit that has gone into so many disasters around the world and has searched for both the victims and the survivors of tragedies. He says that as early as yesterday during the day that the unit was able to take some of its search dogs and go through very gingerly some of the area. He said that they, quote, identified some bodies, close quote, by which he means that they did find some people who had been killed. He did not have a number. He did not say, however, they had been removed. We have been told that a temporary mortuary has been set up not far from here. We do not have any information from the Pentagon on any casualty numbers or even an estimate of them. There was one local fire chief who said it could be anywhere between 100 and 800 deaths as a result of this. Pentagon officials think that the upper figure is way too high. Now, he also said, he being the Fairfax County search and rescue person, that the search is resuming today. It stops overnight because it is so dark and so smoky inside that there is a concern that people are going to trip over the debris as they conduct their search. But the search is beginning inside now as they try and find out exactly the human tragedy of this catastrophe that has befallen the Pentagon. At the very same time, in other parts of the building, the Pentagon is open for business. It was important to the Defense Secretary, he said, to show that in spite of all this, that the operations here would continue. About half the building is considered safe enough to use. 17 miles of corridor, so about half of those are going to be in the safe area. That includes many of the vital operations that are conducted by the Pentagon. Meanwhile, the grim search goes on for the casualties of this disaster. Miles?
Bob, there are 20,000 workers who report to the Pentagon each day. I assume that not all of them have been asked to report to those areas that are considered safe. Is it just essential personnel?
Well, the word was spread through Washington media in the hours yesterday and overnight that people should call supervisors to find out if, in fact, they are among those who should go in. But, of course, many of them know what part of the Pentagon where they work, and, of course, some of the answers would make good sense. But the Pentagon is open for business. They're making a very important point with that, they believe, and it opened about 45 minutes ago.
CNN's Bob Franken at the Pentagon. Thank you very much. Let's turn now to London, where the markets there are taking a moment now to remember those victims of these attacks. A moment of silence. Let's listen. London markets ceasing business for a period of time to remember those killed and injured in those dramatic attacks. Paula?
Thanks so much, Miles. I think that'll be a scene repeated all over the world today. I know churches are talking about having moments of silence throughout the country, and no doubt Americans today will continue to feel the sting of this horrible tragedy that has confronted our country. Right now, I am joined by Dennis Ross, who is the former special envoy in the Middle East. He served in the Clinton administration. Welcome, sir. Good to have you with us this morning. I wanted you to provide some context for us today. Yesterday, we saw some groups of Palestinians celebrating in East Jerusalem and in the West Bank, and declaring this as a victory against Israel. How widely held of a view is that among Palestinians?
I think today it's probably wider than many Palestinian officials would suggest that it is. I mean, you are dealing in a climate where there's a lot of anger among the Palestinians and a desire to hit back. But there's also a climate that has been created by their leadership. You cannot continually talk about the virtues of martyrdom. You cannot continually talk about the importance of struggle. And you cannot continually extol the virtues of the suicide bombers and talk about how the United States must also pay without there being a consequence in terms of attitudes. One of the things that is going to have to be done, not only with the Palestinians, but with many of the Arab regimes that are friendly to the United States, they cannot continue to use their media as a release for outrage and for anger, and therefore allow within those medias, which basically are not free except to spew certain hatred, they cannot use those medias to create a climate of legitimacy for this kind of behavior, and that is what they have done.
How are you going to stop that from happening?
Well, one of the ways is if, in fact, these governments, especially in the Middle East, among our Arab friends, want us to be engaged in terms of pursuing diplomacy at an appropriate moment, there's also going to have to be an understanding that there's no free lunch here. They have responsibilities too. And one of the ways that they can carry out their responsibilities is to make it clear this behavior does not represent their cause, it discredits their cause, and in fact, if they want the world to identify with their interests, they're going to have to behave differently.
All right, but the bottom line is a lot of people think that U.S. policy in the Middle East makes the United States much more vulnerable to attack. Is that true?
Well, there's no question right now that there is anger that is obviously directed against us because of the frustration of what's going on in the conflict. But again, I'll tell you, if we had been able, as we were trying to do last year, to end the conflict between Israelis and Palestinians last year, the people who carried out this attack would have done it anyway. They don't believe in peace. They don't believe in Israel's existence. They reject everything that we represent. So one of the things that has to happen is these groups have to be completely discredited.
And do you have any level of optimism that will ever happen?
Well, I think we all have to transform our own thinking. Yesterday was a transforming event. We're going to have to create a new priority in terms of the war on terror. We're going to have to create a very different kind of coalition internationally that focuses on how, in fact, we all work together to discredit this practically and psychologically. And I think also whatever it is we're going to do militarily has to take a long view about rooting out the real networks that exist. But I don't think one can simply sit back and say because the task is difficult, we can't take it on. We've now been confronted with something that is so dramatic, that is worse than any war we've confronted in terms of casualties in a single day. Our own thinking is going to have to change as well.
I know that Henry Kissinger stated yesterday that this is the time the United States is going to find out the true level of friendships with other nations. How critical is any role that Russia might play in this?
Well, I do believe the Russians have some capability when it comes to fighting terror, and also there is a history of some relations they have with some of the groups in the area. In the past, it would have been more profound because, in fact, they tended to support those groups. Now I think it's less profound. But in terms of creating a psychological atmosphere internationally, the more the Russians, the more the Europeans are seen as joining with us in terms of making it clear this behavior is not simply unacceptable, but it won't be tolerated. And those states that give a kind of safe haven are also not going to be tolerated. The more that happens, the more we'll be moving in the right direction.
Dennis, if you would be generous enough to stand by, I want to continue my conversation with you, but I want to remind our audience it was just about 24 hours ago, and we're going to replay some pictures here of the first hijacked commercial airliner that struck the North Tower here in New York City. Actually, this is the picture of the South Tower, which was the second attack that came 18 minutes later. Once again, this city just starting to come to grips with the impact of this double attack here yesterday. Dennis, Secretary of State Colin Powell was a guest on the air earlier this morning and bristled when I asked him about Senator Orrin Hatch's assessment that U.S. intelligence has now intercepted communications between bin Laden supporters actually discussing the attacks. Bristles may be too strong of a word, but I think he made it quite clear he is extremely uncomfortable that Senator Orrin Hatch is talking about any of this intelligence information. You understand that, I guess?
Yes, I do. Well, look, I think there are two dimensions to that. The first is we obviously have certain kinds of techniques and methods which we don't want compromised, because if they get compromised, then you lose the capacity to use those. And obviously, right now, what we're trying to do in the intelligence area is figure out exactly what happened, look back at what might have been indicators that were discounted because they weren't seen as plausible, and then pursue those leads. So anything that compromises the ability to find out what happened is obviously something that's not going to be in our interest, number one.
All right, but Dennis, do you have reason to believe these communications were actually intercepted, showing? I mean, we know that an Arab newspaper based in London, I think at least the editor had reported that these attacks were telegraphed as long as 3 weeks ago. Do you believe the intelligence information?
Look, my sense at this point is we don't really know. And the tendency is to leap to a conclusion because we all want to know in response to such a horrific set of events. I would just tell you from a historic standpoint, we were convinced early on that with Pan Am 103 it was groups based in Syria. Later on we found out that it wasn't. It may well be that the speculation about Osama bin Laden turns out to be right, but I think we really do have to be cautious at this point. The people who carried this out not only had great organization, they had people who could fly these planes. That's not something that is normally associated with the Osama bin Laden group. So I think one has to be somewhat cautious, and I think that Secretary Powell's reaction was entirely appropriate.
All right, Dennis Ross, thank you very much for all your insights this morning. We very much appreciate your joining us. Right now, we're going to turn our attention to London, and that's where we find Christiane Amanpour this morning. You're what, outside 10 Downing Street right now?
Yes, indeed, Paula. We're outside 10 Downing Street, the official residence and office of the British Prime Minister. Britain, the United States' closest ally in Europe. In the last couple of hours, the Prime Minister has done several things. He's had a 20-minute telephone conversation with President George W. Bush. He has had a press conference in which he was very forthright and very convincing towards the press about how he viewed what had happened in the United States yesterday. He's convened security meetings and he is convening a cabinet meeting. He's calling back Parliament to discuss this issue and raise a public debate as to what has happened and what measures can be taken to combat this kind of terrorism. He said that this is not just an attack on the United States, but one on the entire free world. He said that he and other presidents and prime ministers in Europe are in constant touch about how to, quote, stop this machinery of terror, how to eradicate and defeat what he called these terrorists. And this, it must be pointed out, was not just the single biggest act of terrorism against the United States, but in recorded memory, the single biggest act of terrorism anywhere in the world that anybody can remember. And to that effect, the Prime Minister said, and other analysts have said, to that effect, essentially everyone today is an American.
I want to make one thing very clear indeed. This was not an attack on America alone. This was an attack on the free and democratic world everywhere. And this is a responsibility that the free and democratic world have got to shoulder together with America. And at this time of tragedy in the United States of America that has consequences right across the world, and as I say, there will be British people that have lost their lives, this time of tragedy and this time of grief and anger and trial in America, it is important that Americans know that their allies and their friends around the world do stand shoulder to shoulder with them.
Now, the Prime Minister mentioned that he expected that there could be a great number of British casualties, since there are a lot of British people in the United States living there as residents and working there. He said to that effect, Britain's interests are effectively engaged in what he called this combat against terrorism. He called this an act of terrorism on a scale that was, quote, never before contemplated. While he would not be specific about what possible retaliation or action that could be taken against whoever becomes identified as responsible, he did insist that the leaders of Europe, in consultation with the United States, would take whatever measures necessary to make sure that this kind of terrorism was eradicated. Again, no specifics, but the Prime Minister very forceful. And then he would not be drawn on who he thought was actually responsible, but he did single out, without being prompted, the Muslim community in Britain, singling him out, saying that he was very gratified that they had come out and denounced this act of terrorism, like he said did the Muslim community of the United States. Again, when we specifically asked him, do you believe that this was Islamic terrorism, he did not answer. Again and again, he called this an attack on the civilized world, an attack not just on the United States, but on humanity and on democracy. When we asked him, do you believe that this is a declaration of war, and therefore are you, the civilized world, obligated to take action to combat this? Again, he wouldn't be drawn, other than to say that they were in close consultation and that this act of terrorism and the machinery of terrorism and the finance and the support has to be stopped. Paula?
The Prime Minister, and in that short soundbite, forcefully talked about the collective need to fight this kind of terrorism. What kind of level of support can President Bush expect in Europe?
Well, certainly from Great Britain, I would say a great deal of support. Remember, the British have stood shoulder to shoulder, as the Prime Minister said, with the United States in various actions in the last 10 years alone, much less in history. They have been shoulder to shoulder during the Gulf War, in Bosnia, in Kosovo. This Prime Minister, Tony Blair, took a leading role in the action against Kosovo. This country has said over and over again that it stands together with its chief ally, the United States. And at the moment, what we're hearing from every capital of Europe is that they are together with the United States, because this is an attack against, quote, all of us. We are all targets, they said. And Germany, for instance, offered unlimited support. This is in the words of German Chancellor Gerhard Schröder, and he stressed the word unlimited. All the capitals of Europe are holding emergency security convening meetings, cabinet meetings, security meetings. All are in touch with each other. There's a special meeting of the European Union NATO's chiefs have been meeting as well. And this has really, as you can imagine, focused people's minds here. And it remains to be seen what exactly they do. Will they try to line up support in like-minded countries and in the Middle East, for instance, amongst allies and elsewhere around the world, to make people, as they say, stand up on the side of civilization against what they call these barbaric acts of terrorism?
Christian, earlier today I had a chance to peek at some of the headlines in the London newspapers on a very human level. What is the reaction of average British citizens to what the kind of wrath that we...
Well, on a very human level, I can tell you the reaction is one of shock, profound shock, and indeed fear. I've heard people talking about how this is just scary. People cannot imagine that something of this magnitude, of this organization, in a place like New York and Washington and other cities in the United States, that this could happen. And people really feel that if this can happen in the United States, well, then it can happen anywhere. United States is meant to be Fortress America. This is not meant to happen in the United States of America, and it has profoundly shocked people. I talked to people, I was flying yesterday after this had happened. I talked to pilots and air crews and passengers on the planes, all of them absolutely stunned beyond words. There are no words that can really sum up exactly what has happened and what people are feeling. Here in England, talking to taxi drivers, people on the streets, people are using the analogy to Pearl Harbor. People are using words like barbaric. This is profoundly shocking. Every single newspaper here, even the normally sedate broadsheets here, have got blaring headlines: assault on America, doomsday America, one, the Times of London, war on America, you know,